at. Now I'm recording. There we go. So everybody's going to have to go to Blog Talk Radio in order to listen to the intro. Too bad. Okay, so what we're going to do today is we're going to have Rob come up on mic, and he is going to again speak about the High Christology that we find in the Gospel of Mark. And last week, I'm just going to tell you, one of the most fascinating verses that I was familiar with it, but it really never occurred to me to use that as an authentic or genuine great a polemic against Islam's teaching that Jesus never said he was God or never had the attributes of God. And that's when we go to Mark 2, where he healed the paralytic. But when he says, and I saw that Nassam was he's not here yet. Nassam in chat said that was just kind of a figurative thing or a passive allusion to Jesus being God. But when you read verse, I think it's 11, where it says, so that you may understand that the Son of Man has the authority to forgive sins on earth, I say to you, pick up your bed and walk. So not only does he forgive sins, things that only God is able to do, but also he confirms his authority to forgive sins by performing a miracle, something that Muhammad never did to confirm anything that he said. And after I got to thinking about that, and this past week, that was just absolutely amazing. So I'm going to quit running my mouth, and I'm going to let Rob take over. It is real, and real late where he is, but that's okay. He's enjoying himself at O Dark 30. Rob, come up on mic, sir, and let us know what you want us to know today. Go.
Thank you. God bless everyone, and thanks again to you, Eric and Chris, for giving me the opportunity. Don't mind me. I'm just going to have some scotch while we have this discussion. So I'm just a big scotch lover. So in fact, I drink scotch when I write these studies as well. So maybe that's how I get these types of inspirations. But just what I could do is I could summarize briefly what I spoke about last week. I did go shotgun approach, and as Eric pointed out, that's just me. I like to go way in depth in the research context, and I know a lot of this you need time for it to soak in. Just like I had the privilege of having time to soak it in myself. Just following from what Eric pointed out just a moment ago, specifically with the healing of the paralytic, where the actions speak louder than words. So I run a weekly study group every Thursday, and what I'll do is I'll share my screen so everyone can follow along.
Hold on. I think I gotta give you permission to do that.
No, I can do it.
Oh, you can?
I can do it. Yeah.
Well, I've lost all control. Oh my goodness. I'm feeling a weakness.
So someone's giving me the permission to do it. So
I think we made you co-host, and when you're in your co-host, you have permissions to do that. So super deal.
So basically last Thursday with my study group, we reached Mark 3 now. So we've finished Mark 1 and 2. We just started Mark 3. Specifically also in regards to that notion that the so-called action Jesus does about healing that paralytic man. If you just isolate that passage in chapter 2, what you're doing is you're ignoring, and this is what scholars in all the commentaries will point out, you're ignoring what's known as a Markan sandwich. So a specific, very large chiastic Markan sandwich actually starts with verse 1 of chapter 2, as you can see where my mouse is. Notice healing of the paralytic man. And then there's so a chiasm is like a staircase, specifically a literary type of thing, like an artistry that the author wants you to see the build-up of leading up to a certain point, and then the staircase sort of reverses back as a sort of like mirroring of how he started the story. And so in this case, if it is indeed, in historical Jesus studies, if this is indeed a historical thing, then that means Jesus is being deliberate with the way he does things, the way he moves in certain directions, the way he heals. So in other words, he heals another paralyzed person, specifically a withered hand, at the start of chapter 3, echoing what he did in chapter 2. And so as you can see with this chiasm, the staircase ultimately, so the mark and sandwich is nothing but top layer of a sandwich and then the bottom layer of a sandwich. What are they? They are the bread slices that hold together what is not common in a sandwich. So what's common in a sandwich are the two bread slices. So in this case, the top bread slice would be the paralytic man. The bottom bread slice, again, is another paralyzed man, but specifically with a hand. So in a sandwich, what's in between is usually what's not related to each other. It could be lettuce, could be meat, whatever. And so they may not have any interrelationship with each other, but they're part of that sandwich. And so what makes a sandwich a whole sandwich is when you put it all together and, it tastes nice. So specifically the controversy over fasting and the Sabbath is the meat of that sandwich. And and this is where Eric was pointing out, that's where Jesus hones in specifically on, because he gives himself the divine messianic title, Son of Man, which is from Daniel 7. If the Son of Man is able to be Lord of the Sabbath, if the Son of Man is able to forgive sins, the Son of Man is doing these actions of healing, well, it's all well and good, if a so-called prophet or a healer, right, or like a guru, just utters words like, your sins are forgiven. Anyone could do that. But let's actually see if his sins are actually forgiven. And then the action is done, which then leads to that controversy context. And then the mark and sandwich, so the mirroring again goes back to chapter 3, verse 1, about the healing of the paralytic hand. Now, it's all well and good for, when Jesus says, get up and pick up your mat and walk, right? Now that again could be a type of like, maybe Yahweh's doing the healing and then Jesus is just the prophet, sort of like working through that, right? Which you could say, Jesus is not God in flesh, so to speak, when he does that. So when he goes about saying, look, your sins are forgiven. So when you go to the paralyzed hand context, and this is what the group was looking at last Thursday, where I showcase a certain the way the work is generated. So on this particular page in the study, and I'll just read this bit just to cap off what Eric was getting at, that thus the healing of the man with the paralyzed hand was beautifully narrated with an extreme economy of words. And so this economy of words in this sense is in scholarship, they notice, because Mark is a gospel of action and a gospel of being very very fine-tuned with, so not being exhaustive, like kind of like say Matthew and Luke. They take their time with the details. Mark he wants to stick with very quick observations of what's going on. So in other words, an economy of words, right? But at the same time, it's beautifully narrated, where Jesus says to the man, hold out your hand, which is ironically an action that used to be impossible for the man, but is now suddenly possible. And so then he held it out, which demonstrates for all to see that his hand was restored to health, its function reestablished. And the interesting thing about this is Jesus did not touch the man. The work was a verbal command. And so, this will then lead into, at the end of this particular mark and sandwich, specifically the phrase, the Pharisees and the Herodians. Now, this is a very interesting group. There's over 14 different identifications for the Herodians, but they want to kill Jesus now. Because notice the mark and sandwich, it starts in Mark chapter 2. Jesus is doing wondrous things. So last week I was talking about Mark chapter 1, the inauguration of the servant of Yahweh. He's also, his name Jesus, Yahweh's salvation. He's baptized in the Jordan. He's doing miracle work. He's right off the bat, he's engaging with the unclean spirits. That phrase unclean is a connotation back to the Watcher myth of Genesis 6, the whole Nephilim context. So even the Shadim, the Hebrew word for demons of the Old Testament, they know who Jesus is because he's the son of the Most High, and it was the Most High that judged these spiritual entities. So he's engaging with all that, and so then the Mark and Sandwich then starts. Not the only Mark and Sandwich, but one of the first big ones in Mark starts in chapter 2, where he's doing these actions, right? And then the end of that sandwich is literally verse 6, where it says that the Pharisees and the Herodians plot now to kill Jesus. So to show the chronology, and this then connects to the High Christology of Jesus. So to show this chronology, the Pharisees moved from a desire to condemn Jesus, this is verse 2, to hostile silence, verse 4, then a refusal to consider the significance of his ministry, verse 5, and now finally to a murder plot. And on this particular page, I won't go into the details, but this is just to show you the 14 different identifications that scholars have provided for who are these Herodians. But I'll just show you Athanasius over here, where he's like, look, while the withered hand was restored, the withered minds of the onlookers were not, for they went out immediately according to the reading, were debating what they would do to Jesus. Are you debating what you will do? So this is like an interesting, like, little pastoral insight here that Athanasius has, where he's like, look, worship him as God, worship the wonder worker, worship one who worked good things on behalf of another. So in other words, this is me coming in. In other words, as Jesus worked openly to heal, so we are to show forth our healing openly through our worship. And then Athanasius continues, he did not add plasters, he was not tenderizing with lotions, he did not apply medical ointments. He did this work openly, standing in their midst, and not in a hidden way, so that some might retort, he applied a plant or he added plaster. After I give a quick survey of who the Herodians are, the key takeaway point, and this, and I'll end it with this, and then we can go to Q&A. The key takeaway is that early on in Mark's Gospel, and don't forget, Mark's Gospel is considered the first biography of Jesus as far as the dating of the Gospels. Right at the start, or in fact, right at the end of the Mark and Sandwich, but still right at the start of the Gospel, you already have Pharisees and this thing known as the Herodians as a group that are kind of like their own. Think of them as their own, like, zealot group. Like, say that, I'm just going to use this loosely. Think of it like the 300 Spartans. They had their king Leonidas. They're going to do their own thing, right? So think of the Pharisees and the Herodians as this splinter group that are actually, they mean well. They have right intentions. And they're looking for a Messiah, a king, to run to lead them. So in other words, they're looking for their Leonidas. So this is why they actually come to Jesus. This is why they're testing him. This is why they're like, oh, who's this? And what is he doing? But then he's doing things and saying things that even they are going, hang on a second, this is blasphemous. This is what's so ironic about it. So in other words, it's like, okay, Jesus is now is not only a threat to the Roman context, right, from a political context. He's even a threat to us, because he's like a lone wolf in this. He's and in fact, not just a lone wolf, but kind of like last week when I spoke about the Abiathar issue, that will then lead to the calling of the 12. He's doing his own group calling. So as I put over here in these paragraphs, the Herodians denotes supporters of Herod who owe their position to him and to his relationship with the imperial family. And this is just like a little bit of a history about how, I'll just read this last paragraph here. The establishment of a Jewish king did not necessitate the overthrow of the Romans who rule in Judea directly and in Galilee indirectly. As Herod had been appointed king of the Jews by the Senate of Rome, the Herodians and Pharisees might very well cooperate in achieving the goal of establishing another Jewish king of Judea. And a little bit of like an example of that is when Agrippa I was actually appointed as quote unquote Herod in 41 AD, as you see in Acts 12. So in summary, here's the point. In summary, the Pharisees and Herodians agreed in principle that Jesus had to be silenced, and perhaps began discussing the tactical question of how this could be achieved, given his popularity. Jesus did not have the political credentials to be quote-unquote king of the Jews, and in the view of the Pharisees, he was too unorthodox, because not only is he doing what he's doing, but he's also eating with tax collectors and sinners, willing to violate the law in its traditional interpretation, and claiming to have a unique status that transcended that of King David. This is ironic because in their local context, they would have made Jesus their king. So in other words, say if Jesus was sort of not, in other words, here's the point. If Jesus wasn't acting in a very bizarre way, in other words, imitating literally Yahweh on earth, but at the same time doing things that at the surface level seems contrary to, say, how Moses would conduct things and so on, and ultimately David. So if Jesus is just like another human prophet, but with a kind of like a Nehemiah, right? Imagine, like, because Nehemiah is like that political sort of struggle with, or Ezra, like bringing back Jerusalem into the fold, and then that whole political thing, like, because don't forget, they're still under Roman or Gentile occupation in the first century. So if Jesus was like a Maccabean, Judas Maccabeus, or like a Nehemiah, it's like, yeah, they would have approached Jesus. They would have said, hey, can you be part of our group? Can you like join our like rebellion? And then finally we can bring Israel to the full fold and so on. So in their local context, they would have made Jesus their king. And so, but here's the point, because Jesus does things that then caught them off guard, right? And as we can see, he's clearly Yahweh in flesh. This is why then Jesus later to Pilate says, my kingdom does not belong to this world, because if my kingdom belonged to this world, my servants would fight to keep me from being handed over to the Jewish leaders. So there's a little hint. It's like, if I was meant to be a human with my own little localized human kingdom here, then these guys that you know about, they would have been fighting for me. But then he clearly says, but for now, my kingdom is not from here. And so notice John, this is in John's gospel, end of John's gospel, and yet Mark, which is the first gospel, way in the 50s AD, so way before John's gospel, there's a huge connection between the two gospels, where you have that political thing going on in that private discussion between Jesus and Pilate, and then hence, because John's gospel is High Christology anyway, obviously he's speaking about Jesus, his kingdom from way up there. And then here, early in Mark's gospel, when Jesus is like, the kingdom is at hand, the kingdom of God is at hand, and he's inaugurating the kingdom, and you're seeing this political tension in Mark's gospel about how they want to engage Jesus, obviously in a very evil way, really. Those two, it beautifully connects in that sense. And so yeah, I guess that's all that needs to be said for now. I'm happy to answer questions, because then I can, like, if it's anything else, like could be chapter 1 all the way to 5 on other issues, I have the material here to engage those questions if you want. So go for it.
All right. So first question.
Oh, Eric is muted, by the way.
Eric, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I had some questions that are outside of chapter 5, but I think Chris had some. If Chris wants to come up on mic.
Yes, sir, I do.
Okay, you got to.
All right. So can everybody hear me?
Yeah, you're kind of soft. I don't know if your mic was turned down or.
Hello.
Well, we can hear you. It's just, that's okay. Keep going. You're clear as a bell, but I was just saying that you weren't very loud. That's all right. Go ahead.
All right. So, Mr. Robert Rowe.
Yep.
I see that Mark starts his gospel, of course, Mark chapter 1, verse 1, saying the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Why do you believe Mark would start his gospel and identify Jesus as a Son of God? And what does it mean?
Yeah. So the pages 4 and 5 of this study will show that the fascinating thing about the whole Second Temple corpus, the Second Temple Jewish corpus of, say, the Qumran community, and then leading into the Hellenized Jewish context of the Pharisees, the Sadducees, all those splinter groups, pretty much right at the start of the first century. They had Messiah concepts in a very hypothetical, with a hypothetical hope in regards to, kind of like in John's Gospel, John chapter 2, this temple has been being built for so many years. It's still being built. Then you have the Roman occupation. And so it's still a splinter in the mind in all these Jews' minds. It's like, you still don't have true sovereignty. And what gave them a lot of trouble is actually how the Old Testament ends. The so-called last book of the Bible, Malachi, is a cliffhanger. If you read the whole of Malachi, it's like God's giving a lot of promises, but there's no, this is post-exilic as well, but there's no, it's not complete, in other words. So
yes, so you're basically trying to say that one of the reasons is Mark starting his gospel off like this, as in like a continuation from the end of the Old Testament to bring it into the New Testament then.
Pretty much. And I get all the details are here as you can see me highlighting. You have specific terms: beginning, Jesus, what the word or the name Jesus means, gospel. Why does he say beginning? Obviously, just that one word alone, there's 100-page books just dedicated on that one word, beginning, because does beginning speak about the first 3 verses or the first 13 verses or the whole book? How, like, all that stuff. Well, once you sorted it all out, right, even down to this unique title, this notion that Jesus is Son of God and he's Messiah. So you have both, that servant of Yahweh, and he's the Son of God. The church father Origen actually all that scholarship, Origen in the 3rd century already was ahead of the game, really. So I'll just read what he says. He says, look, the gospel is primarily concerned with Christ Jesus, who is the head of the whole body of those who are being saved. Mark conveys this point when he says, quote, the beginning of the gospel concerning Christ Jesus. In its unfolding, the gospel has a beginning. But you see, this is where the scholars rightly go, well, again, but what does that mean, beginning? Because we can say beginning of the New Testament, New Covenant, New Testament. But then is that, because again, think like a Jew, 1st century Jew. And these are Jews, by the way, putting the New Testament together. The claim then, according to the Second Temple Jews, and specifically Christians, is that it's the beginning of that continuation of the cliffhanger of the Old Testament. So in other words, the Old Testament ends on a cliffhanger. We've now waited 400 years or that, give and take. Boom. Okay, now it's the beginning of that solution to all that stuff that ended on a cliffhanger. Because in other words, the whole Old Testament, right from Genesis then, which is a pretty remarkable thing if you think about it, is now culminating with the beginning, Jesus, which means that John the Baptist then is closure to the Old Testament. So the Old Testament's not complete until John the Baptist does what he does. And so then Origen goes, look, it is, in its unfolding, the gospel has a beginning, a continuing middle, and an end, right? But the beginning can be viewed either as the entire Old Testament, with John the Baptist being its summarizing type, or because he stands at the juncture of the new with the old, the final stages of the Old Covenant. This runs counter to, so this obviously he's engaging Marcion and all those other guys, this runs counter to those who would assign the two covenants to two different gods. And you see the same thing with atheists today as well. Like, the Old Testament's God is different to the New Testament. Those who deepen in the knowledge of Christianity do not treat the things written in the law with disrespect. So in saying the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ as it is written in the prophet Isaiah, so now what Origen's doing is he's going to the next verse 2. Mark shows that the beginning of the gospel is intrinsically connected with the Old Testament. So in other words, make sure you know your Old Testament if you're going to read this thing about Jesus, because everything that happens in the Old Testament is in the person of Jesus. And boom, high Christology right off the bat, just because of that.
Yeah, now the only other question I would have, it's not really a follow-up, but we can also see within the first few chapters of Mark that the unclean spirits, or even the unclean spirits, or even the demons, as in Mark 3:11, they fall down before Jesus. Why is this so important? Because our Unitarian friends and our Muslim friends seem to think that Jesus is just some type of created being, and if he is, then why would they do this type of thing to another created being?
So excellent, because it's all in that word unclean. Why not just say demon or spirit or something? Unclean, again, is a hint, because, and again, Mark and scholars will notice this, it's a hint to show that Mark, or the author of Mark, so just for the sake of argument, I am a conservative in the sense I believe in John Mark, connected with Peter, and then he's composing the gospel together around 50 AD. Some, believe it or not, there are critical scholars who put Mark to about 38 AD, and then some put it to the late 60s. I'm in between that, all because of the chronology of Paul and Pauline theology and so on. But regardless, the point is,
when do you put it, Robert? I was just
kind
of curious.
Say in the mid 50s. So like on this page here in the introduction over here, so I put over here either between 35 to 50 or 50 to 64. This range here is dependent on literally 10,000. I'm not kidding. Someone actually did a statistic of how many studies have been done on Mark alone, and he counted with a computer model. He counted up to 10,000 works since the 1800s on Mark. And when he did a semantic range, like when he digitized all the works and kind of like, say, Logos software, right, is a powerful tool for this, where you then do like a keyword search and see what dates are given. This is the range that you have, and everything seems to the mean variance is mid 50s roughly. So but yeah, it actually points out that Mark is or the author of the gospel, or the gospel itself, is very familiar with Second Temple demonology. So texts like the Book of Enoch and so on are very important as far as Second Temple scholars are concerned, because they want to see the link between the type of, in other words, when they're working with demonology, the type of theology, like the study of demons and the paranormal in that sense, with exorcisms and all that. And by the way, this is work not even related to Christianity or related to the defense of Christianity. This is just specialized areas of study. Second Temple texts are the bridge to Mesopotamian religious texts like cuneiform Babylonian texts like the Enuma Elish and so on, that then extend back to very ancient proto-history that you see back in Genesis 1 to 11. So it's interesting that bridge then, as you can see here on this page, I give a summary of what the Genesis count is getting at, and that is 3 rebellions. You have rebellion 1, which is Genesis 3, humans rebelling. The second rebellion is Genesis 6 with the sons of God and the women. And then the third rebellion is the Tower of Babel. And then Yahweh starts with the clean slate, Genesis 12, with Abraham. So in other words, Genesis 1 to 11 is one big entire myth, like a mythology, right, of three key rebellions to cause Yahweh to do one big thing that he does do, and that is this Abraham, Israel, and all that. Now, in other words, when Jews were wrestling with, for example, this what they call the Rephaim spirits, and all throughout the Old Testament, you see these entities called the Rephaim that lurk in the underworld. So the Mesopotamian equivalent are what's known as the Apkallu, as you see me over here. In other words, Genesis 6 was a theological polemic against the tale of the Apkallu in Mesopotamian religion. These Apkallu outside Israelite religion are what you would ultimately call the unclean spirits of the netherworld. So by the time you reach the Second Temple Corpus, they would ask questions like, so when the Nephilim died, and when you see Israel go into Canaan and kill those giants, and apparently those giants are connected to this Nephilim Apkallu thing, where do they roam? So for example, Goliath, he's a type of Nephilim. Where does his quote-unquote spirit roam if he is a product of that mixing of category of divine and physical? So notice, why is it unclean? Because in the Levitical law, if you mix things, it becomes unclean, unholy. So notice the pattern here. So if Mark is going out of his way to say unclean spirit, well, unclean is connected to the Levitical perspective of mixing of categories, the unnatural mixing of categories. Deuteronomy 32 is the key crux chapter for all of Old Testament theology, specifically verse 8 and 9. Because verse 8 says, when the Most High divided up the nations, he divided them up according to the number of the gods. And this is connecting to also ancient Near Eastern perspectives of El with the gods and so on. So Genesis 11 is dividing the nations, putting them under the category of other gods. But verse 9 says, but Yahweh's portion is his portion, Jacob, right? So Israel and so on. And then this is why the prophets have this notion of Israel being the light to the nations. The nations will come back, one day will come back to Yahweh worship. Psalm 82 is exactly this. God stands in the divine council. He judges among the gods. He then utters a judgment to them, you'll die like men. Verse 8 then says, arise, O God, for you will then reclaim all the nations. Now, where do we see the reclaiming of the nations happen? Remember when Satan says, bow down to me and I'll give you all the nations? Acts 2 happens, Pentecost, all the nations come back. And those nations come back to Jesus, via the Trinity, Spirit. Like Jesus says, a few days from now, you'll be thing with the Holy Spirit that I spoke about. So there's a Trinity at work. He gets back the nations without bowing down to Satan. So coming back to your question, this is a very rich, very deep ancient Near Eastern context that then, by the time you reach Jesus and these so-called unclean spirits, because the unclean spirits are these Nephilim, disembodied Nephilim things, they know who he is because they give him a title, Son of the Most High, because it was the Most High, Deuteronomy 32, who judged all the gods, put them under, other nations and so on, the fallen sons of God, really. And they know who he is, but they don't know why he's there. That's the point. It's like, what are you doing here? Have you come now to put us, notice, have you come now to put us in Tartarus, in the underworld, like, in the deep, dark depths of hell? Yahweh is the one who does that sort of judgment. But so they know, again, the two powers thing comes out at play, and they know, okay, he has authority to do that. Sure enough, by the time you reach Revelation, remember chapter 1 of Revelation, I have the keys to Hades, death and Hades. Like, Jesus still brings out that imagery to John in Revelation. So, the fact that the spirits, these unclean spirits, recognize who Jesus is just a dead giveaway right off the bat. So. I will quickly say this though. On this particular page, in regards to exorcism, this is a high Christological point. Jesus will never pray in conjunction with an exorcism, nor will he invoke a high power to bind a demon before commanding it to come out of a person. In other words, he'll never appeal to a high power to cast out a demon. The power to command evil spirits already resides within him. And as I say, because he is this incarnate second Yahweh. So Jesus will never call on the authority of another in his exorcisms. And later on in Acts, you see people go about doing this, where they're like, look, I'm going to drive out demons in the name of Jesus. Usually you think, in the name of Yahweh, in the name of God. But in the name of Jesus, I'm going to drive out demons. And guess what? Today, Christians do that. In the name of Jesus, I cast you out. And yeah, I just wanted to point out that exorcisms, as you can see here on this entire page, exorcisms was actually a very common thing, but they needed tools to do it. And it wasn't 100%, it didn't have 100% success. At the end of the day, we're just humans relying on the sovereignty of the true God to work through the tools. Jesus doesn't need any tool. He just does it.
Okay, I don't know if Chris had anything to add to this or had anything to follow up with, but we do have Dominic Shields here. He has his hand up. Where'd you go, Dominic? You went down here. How'd you get from up there to down there? Let me unmute you. All right, Dominic, did you have a question or a statement or something that you wanted to add to this?
One of the problems that I kind of thought is that I guess that Malachi isn't the last book in the Jewish Bible.
Yeah, I know.
One Chronicles is. It's like from
a Deuteronomistic history context. Yeah.
It's last book of the prophets, but it's not the last book of the actual. It's not the last book of the actual kind of thing. No, I've studied the Dead Sea Scrolls. I think I highlighted all the kind of quotes that were from the Dead Sea Scrolls relating to the Messiah. There is so much more. I mean, it would take an hour just to kind of all solid to, like, just there's like you have like, have you read the Messiah scroll?
Yeah, sure. Melchizedek, 11Q milk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's but there's so many different scrolls that are actually kind of I think, well, because when you said you read, so have you read stuff like is it the Baal cycle?
Yep.
So you have stuff like the Ugaritic text of the Baal cycle.
Yep.
And I can't remember what other, but because when you is it walking on the water or kind of things like that, there's because Baal is the god of thunder, isn't he? According to.
Yeah, so are you connecting that to Daniel 7? Sort of, is Daniel 7 sort of connected to a Canaanite myth and ultimately Baal's cycle imagery that then relates to what's called the sleeping deity motif, like when Jesus sleeps in the boat. And so, because that's dependent on, as you see in the Baal cycle, this notion of him resting, hence when Elijah like mocks Baal as he is asleep. But Yahweh, it's connected to Yahweh, like Yahweh, arise, wake up, Yahweh. Like, in other words, when you see in the creation account, when Yahweh is resting, he has nothing to worry about, is the point. When you have a sleeping deity, he's completely sovereign, has nothing to worry about. Implicitly, you see that in the gospel account with Jesus sleeping.
Have you
go for it.
Museum?
Sorry, you're breaking up. What did you say?
Have you been around the British Museum? Have you been around?
No, I'm in Australia. Unfortunately, I would.
We went around the British Museum, I think, with Jay. We kind of were going around, kind of, because I've got some of the books, and we're going around through some of the actual kind of quotes from the actual kind of. So actually looking at the actual text, like the is it the stuff like the Armani tablets and the and the just some of those, because when you actually read them, you kind of have to list those. Like there's an entire list of gods section. If you read them in person. But the thing that I love is that when you do read those texts, you kind of realize that the Deuteronomy texts or the kind of Torah texts are like so different than the actual. Would you find that they're almost not vastly different, but you have to. There's like a list of. So when you're reading like the Epic of Gilgamesh, you find that there's like a list of like 50 gods at the end, like they're devotions of. But it's even small stuff like laws. I mean, there's the aspect of when God is writing so certain laws that are actually kind of in the thing. He's writing them against those types of gods because he knows it's just that small stuff. But the thing is, with the Gospel of Mark, I would completely agree with you. It's a shame, like current Jews, because I've done a lot of like the church I was formerly in was located in Golders Green, so they kind of were very kind of evangelistic to kind of Jews. They kind of tend to follow a lot of Maimonides, and if the current Jews would actually follow some of the stuff that's in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they would have a lot more higher Christology or actual Messiahology or the actual scriptures. It's because you've got examples of like if I bring up some quotes from the Dead Sea Scroll where it talks about a Messiah is the root and branch of David.
Isaiah 11 stuff, and Isaiah 61.
That's quoted in the actual Dead Sea Scrolls. And then you have, but because you've got books like Daniel and Isaiah that are quoted, that because there are some differences, but there are also some similar. Have you talked with Randall Price at all, Dr. Randall Price?
Maybe in PM, but not verbally.
Just contact, because is he one of the scholars at Qumran? So, have you read?
No, I think. No, I'm thinking of someone else. Like his last name is Rouser, not Price or Rice. Yeah. No, but I have a lot of I have Logos. I have a lot of these Qumran scholars in book form, and
no, because
my favorite, by the way, is Peter Flint. He passed away in 2013, but no, either 2013 or 2016. But Peter Flint, excellent. Like
No, because when I was reading, because one of the ones was that there's a differences. If you like the Jeremiah texts, there's differences in the Jeremiah texts in Qumran. So I think one of them has like Jeremiah 31. It was like I was going, okay, is it the longer text or the shorter text that's missing, or it's because Jeremiah 31 about the new covenant isn't in some of the older kind of Qumran texts. So I had to kind of talk with someone, which is the right text? Is it the longer text or the shorter text? And he kind of basically said it's the longer text because it's more kind of prevalent in some of the in some of the stuff. But yeah, so
I'll show you a really cool redactional example that Qumran connected with. I don't want to butt you in, but what you just said, I want to share this quickly, so for the sake of time. So if you go to the Septuagint, I'll share my screen on my Logos software. I have the new second edition, Lexham edition of the Septuagint that was released a couple of months ago. But if you've ever wondered why, especially when you look at, let me go back to the interlinear, the Greek interlinear of the New Testament. In Mark 1, when it says, I'm sending out a messenger, prepare the way. So as I point out in the Mark study, Mark is amalgamating typical, and I think you know this word, pesha, like Qumran pesha, where you're amalgamating a lot of these old texts, like the 11Q Melchizedek text combines Isaiah 52, the Melchizedek figure, some other Isaiah passages, and Leviticus, the Jubilee context, Leviticus 25-26, and Psalm 82, to say that Melchizedek is the Elohim who judges among the gods and then to usher in.
If I remember rightly from that, is Yahweh Elohim from the actual Hebrew of the actual? It's Yahweh Elohim. I'm for the message is Yahweh Elohim.
Yeah. Elohim just means a place. It's a place of residence term. In other words, an Elohim is a divine entity, but no Elohim is at the ontological level of Yahweh. So he's an Elohim, but without comparison.
In that passage where it quotes from Isaiah, it's actually like I'm sending a messenger. The actual quote from Isaiah is actually Yahweh Elohim. So it's actually kind of quoting that it's not only God, it's kind of like, so yeah, to shout in the willows. So the actual passage, because that passage is quoted a lot in the Dead Sea Scrolls as well. It's kind of quoted.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is the Melchizedek figure. Why? So for example, why does the New Testament refer to Jesus and have a typological connection with Melchizedek? Is because, as you're saying, in the Qumran community, they already have a hypothetical, the second person, like they had a two powers binitarian view. I'm a Trinitarian, but this binitarian, huh?
I'm a Trinitarian as well.
Yeah, I'm a Trinitarian. I'm with you, brother. So like, but what I'm saying is, for the sake of the audience, this is the build-up of that leads to the way New Testament authors were thinking, and you're on the right track. So if you go to the 11Q Melchizedek scroll, Melchizedek is the second Yahweh type figure in the Divine Council of Psalm 82. And if you look at the way scholars attach what quotations are in that scroll, you then start to realize, oh my gosh, he's the messenger of the council. Now, messenger in Greek, angelos, right? Angel, right? Because notice here, this is in Mark. I'm going to send an angel, obviously we translate it as messenger, lead the way and so on. Now, so what Mark is doing is he's conflating Exodus 23, the angel of the Lord, right? The name of Yahweh that's in the angel in Exodus 23:20. He's then going to combine Isaiah 40, because Isaiah 40 is a divine council discussion. Because it's a scene of what will the end days look like? Will Israel be restored? Who will prepare the road or the way for Yahweh, right? And Mark is then combining Malachi, the Elijah office, with John the Baptist, right? So now notice this. We all know Isaiah 9 verse 6, for unto us a child is born, a son is given, his name is called Wonderful Counselor, blah, 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 blah. But the Septuagint, which then if you and I'm going to give this as a little bit of a teaser for you to do your own little devotions. The Septuagint had a huge kind of like a wrench in the works for the Qumran community. In other words, when you look at the Hebrew and the Qumran sort of like pesher and interpretation of Isaiah 9:6 from a Hebrew context, boom, when the Septuagint comes on the scene, and they have the Septuagint with them as well. The Septuagint curiously renders it a little bit different, because the Jewish translators of the Septuagint basically amalgamated all those titles. So Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Father of Eternity, Prince of Peace, those titles, the Septuagint translator was like, okay, what title can be like an umbrella, term that will connotate all these titles that obviously are connected to the God of Israel anyway. So if you go to Isaiah 9:6 in the Septuagint, this is what we see. And this is connected to the quote unquote, as the prophet Isaiah said, prepare the way of the Lord and so on. So where's Mark getting that pesher? Where's Mark getting that amalgamation of theology and the matrix of ideas that he's getting at the start of Mark? From the Septuagint reading of this verse. Now, look at what the Septuagint does. Because a child was born to us, a son was given to us. I'm just going to try and minimize that. So, born to us, a son was given to us, whose leadership came upon his shoulder, and his name is called Messenger of the Great Council. And then that's it. And messenger here in the Greek is angel of the Great Council. That's his name. Well, who's the angel of the Great Council in a Qumranic or Second Temple context? It's the second Yahweh. It's its second power, the Melchizedek figure of the council of Psalm 82, which then the New Testament says, yeah, that's Jesus.
I found the actual scroll. Is it 11Q13?
Yes.
11Q30. It's the actual.
Give that a whole read, because near the end of the scroll you'll see Melchizedek calling literally God, Elohim. Yeah.
So no.
And now you have your two Yahweh or two power or basically two person, the binatarian view coming out pre-Christian.
Because you even have that in like books. Is it even because when it talks like Balaam and things like that, you have there's so much analogy. It's like you kind of go through it and you kind of think, okay, that's a reference, that's another reference. It's like you kind of you can't get around it. But the thing is, because from 21st century mindset, we haven't read any ancient literature. It kind of
well, when you said Jews today look at Maimonides, for example, I have atheists tell me, Tovia Singer, present day rabbinic scholar, he would disagree with you because you read Isaiah 53 like a modern 21st century Christian, with you're reading into Isaiah 53. Isaiah 53 wasn't saying Jesus was rising from the dead. And I will go, you're right. Isaiah 53 is about Zerubbabel. But then, this is where I go, I would love to see Tovia Singer debate a Second Temple Jew on all things Christian theology, because guess what? Pre-Christian, you already have Trinity on the scene. You already have the use of Isaiah 53 about a Messiah figure that's rising from the dead. In other words, exactly what you just said. You have Rabbinic Judaism and Talmudic Judaism that is far removed from Second Temple Judaism, and so in other words, where does Christianity, the theology of Christianity, where does that come from? From the Second Temple theology that's already established. Second Temple era stops when the temple is destroyed in 70 AD. Moving forward with the diaspora of the Jews, you have faction groups, and then you have basically wild speculations and of whatever, right? That then becomes this thing known as Rabbinic Judaism.
Because when I did archaeology in Tiberias, there was because one of the things because Tovia, he tends to debate from say second, like with the, so if you go into like a second, third century synagogue, you find that you've got stuff like Helios on the floor, or you've got like the zodiac symbols on the floor. But any kind of first century synagogue is very, very plain. You only have stuff like, so say if you go to Magdala, you find that there's only like a temple, there's only like maybe an image of a temple, and that's it. Or you go, I think one of the actual kind of stuff. So the thing is, among say first century Talmudic or second century Talmudic Judaism, there's a lot of syncretism with the Roman kind of god. So there's a prince called Nasser, and one of his, so there's like all these idols outside his tomb. So this is one of the things that most like current day Jews don't tend to want to deal with, is actually some of the actual archaeological kind of evidence regarding say to do with people like just to do with some of the early Talmudic writers, because it causes a lot of problems, because there was a lot of syncretism after the time of Jesus with the actual with the Roman culture. Like there's figures with stuff like Aphrodite or the kind of things like that. So there's stuff that's kind of quite controversial. You
see a proto of that.
I was gonna.
Late
can I add
century
something here? I was just gonna offer that the Magdala Temple on Sea of Galilee. My understanding is they had just excavated that within the last 20 years, and all of the indications state, and I might have read what you just said, Dominic, wrong, was that they were completely consistent with what first century Jews would worship. They have that Magdala stone there that provides all of their practices, and you go there, they have mitzvahs, or not mitzvah, what's the ritual bath thing called? Yeah, all of that is there. So if is that what you're saying? They were still practicing that, or had gotten away from that? Is that what you said? Maybe I missed what you said.
The second, so you go to there's another synagogue that's around the Tiberias area, and
my understanding is there's three. There's one up in Capernaum, Magdala, and I think on the west or the east side of. I might be wrong. I know that there's those two. Do you know where the third one might be?
But the thing is, when you go into, say, some of the later synagogues, they don't have that reverence for the once the temple is destroyed. So there's a lot of like mosaics on the floor.
Right, but these were all first century. The one in Capernaum and the one that was in Magdala were first century. These prior to the exilic period.
So you've got stuff like the Zodiac. So you've got stuff like Helios in like second, third century synagogues. I mean, what on earth is that doing there?
Well, that's I was just pointing out that the Magdala one was first century. I did have something a direction I wanted to go with this, Rob, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for it.
Dominic, I appreciate the depth that you're coming here, but I think, dude, you're like 3 floors too deep here for people.
Well, I was just gonna point out that I have other commentary on Revelation 12, specifically bringing out the zodiac imagery in early synagogues, where John is going right in line with showcasing the date of Jesus's birth through that theology. So 11 September 3 BC is all the research in that sense is the birth date for Jesus. So
okay, I wanted
anyway
to
go for it.
Chapter 5 of Mark, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. Just quickly, since you're going there, Dominic, see this thing on my screen here, this particular dissertation. Because you brought up the Baal cycle, I highly recommend you get this dissertation, The Combat Myth According to Mark, from Ancient Near East Genre to Popular Gospel, Brendan Dempsey, because he goes into Baal cycle stuff and shows that Mark, because of that Second Temple bridge, right? Mark is heavily reliant on that to show Jesus as Yahweh battling chaos Kampf, struggle with chaos, all throughout the gospel. And here's the contents, as you can see. So
because because the language that is written is Ugaritic, which is an early
it can, you have a variation of cuneiform and but that does get transliterated down through Aramaic ultimately, and then finally you have Enoch that makes the bridge and all that stuff.
I think there's one time I was trying to learn Ugaritic. It's a hard language to learn Ugaritic. It's not an easy language to learn.
So go for it, Eric. So I just wanted to point out there's a very cool work on that.
To that on the chat, that would be helpful.
Can I attach files in here? Is that possible?
You can post them in chat. You can cut and paste the link and post it in chat. You can't. I don't think you can attach a file. Do you have this on your computer?
Yeah, I have it in my Google Drive. Okay, what I'll do is I'll link you my personal Google Drive. Just request access and it'll be in there.
Okay. I wanted to, the whole focus of this show is to establish some type of link or some type of refutation to Islamic arguments that they have on Christianity. And one of the key things is saying that Jesus is not God. And then when you start bringing up the High Christology of Mark, which they say has a very low Christology, if you listen to Shabir Ally, it evolved over time, But when we look at Mark, we're looking at attributes that only God himself can possess early on. And we talked about this early in the show, and I think you've been covering it. But one of the ones that I kind of find interesting is the woman with the issue of blood.
Oh, yep.
And how just touching the robe of Christ, he feels power going out of him, which indicates... Go ahead and take it away, Rob.
And just to add to this point as well, because there is no Muslim here, so I'll be the Muslim. And I'll start by, Jesus didn't even know which woman actually touched him, and he actually asked, who touched me? So he is not God. So, So please explain these 2 points as
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, Adam, I'm going to mute you if you try that again.
all right, sir.
Okay. Is this G-rated, or can I go into maybe a PG/M?
You can go to PG. I put whenever I upload these to YouTube, I always put that it's not viewable for children.
Okay.
And I do that for a reason, because I want to give us the latitude.
Will you allow me to go in depth in this? Because when you get it from a Greco-Roman medical context, you'll be like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And then it'll trust me, this is something Muslims have no clue on. It's only understood by Greco-Roman medical professionals, well, professionals in the Greco-Roman context, and who are Christian. And it shows how beautifully in fact, it hits on a lot of things. It hits not only on high Christology, it also hits at the social level because of the whole, where we have feminism today going on, and like the whole like so-called patriarchy, and is because literally you have feminist scholars going, why did God incarnate in a male body, let alone like human, but male? Why not female, or why not sexless if he's not going to marry and procreate? Like, in other words, my favorite line by one of my scholar friends, Michael Heiser, he puts it this way: if it's weird, it's important. So that being said, I'm going to give, in fact, just Dominic and all these other guys, I'll give you access. I don't want to be distracted. I'll give you access to the Google Drive after all this. On this page, so here's the scenario with respect to the woman that's touching his robe. And I just to whet our appetite, Peter Chrysologus, 5th century archbishop, like just beautifully the way he looks at the story. Like he says, look, no seas were ever so troubled by the ebb and flow of the tide as the mind of this woman, pulled to and fro by the sway of her thoughts. She's like, there's the hopeless strivings of physicians, like, she couldn't be healed from all that. But I just love how he puts himself in her shoes. Through many years, her body has been an arena of suffering. Every day, unceasing pain she can endure no more. And then notice the language. The Lord is passing by so quickly. Because sure enough, Jesus is moving across. And she notices them like, oh, he can heal me, right? The Lord is passing by so quickly. The time is short to think what she must do, aware that the healing is not given to the silent, and so on and so on. And she knows that this is her soulware salvation. In faith, she touches God, and she knew the gain she sought by stealth would cause no. And this, I love Peter's insight here. She knew the gain she sought by stealth would cause no loss to him from whom she took it. Because if he's infinite, right? If God is if you take something from something that's infinite, you're not removing its infinity. It's still infinite. So now, why is this story the way it is, especially in Mark's gospel? Because again, remember, Mark is written to a Greco-Roman audience. They'll be very familiar with Greco-Roman understandings of the human body, the Hippocratic Oath, Aristotle, Plato, all these philosophers are part of that discussion. In other words, this is connected to the Greco-Roman understanding of what they call the humoral theory, where the human body, if we were to just look at it at the anthropomorphic level, like kind of like think of it like, is it Michelangelo? Like, the one with the hands spread out, the human body where the hands are spread out, the legs are spread out. Who's the guy that made
Leonardo?
No, Leonardo. That's right, Leonardo. Sorry, that famous drawing he drew of the human body spread out, and then he gave it a very proportional sort of view, mathematical proportions. So they had a similar concept, and they noticed that, look, what if is the human body made up of 4 what they call humors? So you have phlegm, blood, yellow bile, black bile, and this is where we get words that we still use today, kind of like melancholy. Like, so black bile was believed to produce depression, due to excess or natural back bile secreted by the spleen, and hence melancholy, because Meliana chole means black bile. And so a lot of these terms we still use today, like apathetic behavior, phlegmatic, for example, the word phlegmatic. So now what I'll do is I'll just skim read a few of these paragraphs. So good health was achieved through the equilibrium of these four humors. So notice on this photo here, on the far right, you have water, wet, cold, hence the phlegm category. From a natural cycle context, that's connected to winter. Whereas notice on the far left, you have fire, yellow bile, or hence summer. But notice you have manhood at the fire, hot, dry category. And on the right, or in between, you're moving more towards the feminine, female category. So in other words, and this is what we'll see, they believed a woman's body was an undercooked male. In other words, it was incomplete. Because when they would put the male body and the female body together, like if they were to line them up, they look identical except for one thing. The genitalia between the legs. Because again, this is the M-rated stuff. They actually discussed extensively in the medical literature, like the woman looks like a castrated male. They would use terms like this, castrated male, because the clitoris looks like a castrated penis. It's meaning the appendage is missing. So hence the woman is an incomplete male, because if she was cooked more in the womb, so to speak, those extra features would come out. So good health was achieved through the equilibrium of these four humors, involving the right temperature and moisture. Otherwise, the body becomes ill when there is an overabundance of or deficit of one of these elements. So if you have more extreme or any one of these things, you need the other opposite to counterbalance the stuff. So in this way, a body that was too dry would be restored through the introduction of additional moisture. So when the body produced unusual symptoms, it was not simply that there was a problem with that particular part of the body, as we might consider modern medicine, but instead the whole body was ill and suffered a dysfunction involving the entire person. So I'm going to quote, for example, a Hippocratic, quote about a particular female that who kept at home, having borne children in the preceding time. When her husband was exiled, she stopped menstruating for a long time. Afterwards were pains and reddening in the joints. When that happened, notice this, her body, according to them, was masculinized and grew hairy all over. She grew a beard, her voice became harsh, and though we did everything we could to bring forth menses, they did not come, but she died after surviving a short time. So in other words, what maintained the regularity of her femininity with the menstrual cycle was the constant sexual function with her husband. The moment her husband was removed, some bizarre things was happening to her, and they were hypothesizing if that's the relationship, that because there's no more sex happening, therefore this imbalance happened. So scale is designated for hot, in this case, men under the category of hot, and cold. So the extreme cold would be connected to things that can just wither very quickly, and that's plants. And in between were women and animals. So this resulted in women viewed as undercooked men, since they did not receive enough heat in the womb to become a male embryo, because women are apparently wetter than men. In other words, women are more porous. Because see, when they look at the two bodies, which body, if you think about it, now notice the rationality of the thinking, which body seems to produce or release more fluids? So a male's body is, think of all the areas a male's body can excrete fluids: the eyes, the mouth, the nose, urinating penis, and obviously defecation. And that's really it. But now notice when you go to the woman, obviously sweat as well, right? So pores, sweat. But if you go to the woman, there's even more areas she's excreting fluids, the breasts, milk. There's this thing, the menses, menstruation. Like there's more fluids coming out of her than the male counterpart. So hence, she's under the category of being wetter and more porous, more. In other words, her body's not hardened and strong. It's very weak and fragile, and hence it gives off more of the stuff. And this is why they had this belief that, look, maybe it's because the female embryo grows slower to take shape, 42 days rather than the male embryo, which is apparently 30 days. So again, a Hippocratic oath says, I say that a woman's flesh is more porous and softer than a man's. Since this is so, the woman's body draws moisture with more speed and in greater quantity from the belly than does the body of a man. Now, Candida Moss is a female New Testament scholar. She says, look, in the ancient world, sexuality was constructed using a sliding scale with male and female at either pole. And again, I won't get into the rest, but this is pretty much, women are colder, they are moist, squishy, porous. It's just repeating the same stuff. So now this is connecting it to the woman touching Jesus. So a regular menstrual cycle was considered a necessity for female body as a means of evacuating excess fluids. So in other words, in fact, let me read the start of this paragraph. The lifestyle of women was considered sedentary, leading to the view that the male body, through exercise, because notice, men were very rigorous, very active, strong, the muscles, all that stuff, right, is able to transfer excess fluids into semen. So all that energy and that heat, the hotter bodies of the male. What is its what is its byproduct? Like our byproduct, say when we're breathing, our byproduct is carbon dioxide. We take an oxygen, our byproduct is carbon dioxide. So at the end of the day, once the man has done his activities for the day, his body now has generated a byproduct in the form of a fluid, semen. But women are sedentary. They don't do much. And that semen fluid is not generated, right? Again, we're stepping the shoes of an ancient Greco-Roman physician here. So then her byproduct is nothing but the blood that was unused during that activity, because they knew blood circulates in muscles, and blood needs to flow for you to, say, lift heavy objects and so on. Well, a woman has no muscles to use, or she has very little muscles to use. So it's this unnecessary excess of blood that the body's generating, and so, well, it needs to get rid of it because it's unused. Hence, menstrual cycle. So the man doesn't need to do menses. So in other words, his expulsion is this generating of semen, which has a fruitful value, hence procreation, while this female body is forced to release surplus fluids through menstruation. So in other words, now when we go to a understanding of a regular menstrual cycle, it was considered a necessity for the female body as a means of evacuating excess fluid, so to maintain that humoral equilibrium. Thus, a menstrual cycle that was erratic or releasing too much or not enough posed a serious health risk, and measures were needed to prevent that. So now in this paragraph here, I get into the whole, like, okay, if God is working through this, right? Because guess what? This gospel message is meant to go to the ends of the earth, which means, guess what? God knows he has to engage the psychology of cultures that have bizarre beliefs. Is the gospel message sufficient enough not only to validate the truthfulness of Yahweh, how he operates, what the gospel means, but he can also engage at a cutting edge level the established beliefs of certain people groups around the world. In this case, a prime example is this Greco-Roman perspective, medical perspective. So for first century Christians, believe it or not, they actually asked this question in the patristic writings. Does the maleness of Jesus privilege men or imply a gender hierarchy? Why does Paul say in Galatians 3, in neither male nor female, you're all one in Jesus? Like, where is he getting that conclusion from? It's because of stuff like this. So are women lesser since God came as a man and not a woman? If both male and female were created in the quote-unquote image of God, are only men redeemed since God specifically took on male flesh? Notice the significance of the story, because Jesus, now this is the point, Jesus disrupts and complicates gender. In other words, Jesus looks unmanly to the Greco-Roman audience when compared to ancient views of masculinity or what it meant to be a man in the Greco-Roman world. Now, now Jesus is a man, by the way. I'm not saying he's unmanly or he's feminine. What I'm saying is this is a teaching of his divinity, and you'll see why. Because if he does something that causes the Greco-Roman people to go, the male body has this function, but he's doing something that is actually impossible to do through that male body, connecting it to the woman, something is weird with this particular man. Either here's the point, either he's not a man or he's some form of God incarnate. That's literally, it's just those are the two conclusions you can make. And obviously Mark wants to go out of his way to say, well, obviously he's God incarnate in a male body. So, here's another New Testament scholar, Brittany Wilson, says, the question, can a male savior save women, operates on the assumption that gender is a fixed polarity. We have seen, however, that biological markers did not determine manhood in the ancient world, and that Jesus' own biological markers were subject to cultural perceptions. Understandings of gender always depend on context, and Jesus did not look manly in his ancient context. Furthermore, and here's the point, so it's leading to this now, when the woman touches Jesus, Jesus's body is not static and hard and rigid like the Greco-Roman understanding of a male body. Rather, porous and constantly in flux. So by his very nature, Jesus upsets the polarity of human and divine, because guess what? He's the God-man, right? As well as the male and female. So to skip all this, like this is again continuing on that humoral theory thing, right? I'll read this bit over here. So just as the woman immediately felt in her body that her bleeding had ceased, Jesus felt in his body that quote-unquote power had gone out of him. Notice this is something that the Muslim or the Unitarians need to understand. It's him, the power coming out of him. But a Greco-Roman audience is not thinking like a Muslim or a Unitarian. They're actually going, but Jesus is a man. His body should not be porous. The only way for it to be porous is if something is overpowering the hardness of the male body, meaning something that's even stronger than a male body. The only thing that's stronger than the male body is a God, right? So the power to penetrate through his body to then go into the woman, right? That's the conclusion they're making. And a woman who's wet, porous, weak, the fact that she can then sustain that power, so that power is coming to her. So so here's the social teaching taking place, or the beautiful, like the reformation of gender roles, right? It's empowering the woman up to the man level, saying, look, you're because male and female in the image of God, so both have an equal opportunity to be saved in Jesus. That's the beautiful message in this. So Candida Moss says, in the narrative, the flow of power from Jesus mirrors the flow of blood from the woman. Like the woman, now notice this, because when she touches him, right, Jesus is actually unable to control the flow that emanates from his body, like the flow of blood. So this is the beauty of the Markan literature, or the style and how the story is playing out. Is to show, just like she has an uncontrollable problem, Jesus has an uncontrolled problem where, because he's divine, that divine power just automatically just comes out of him. So like the flow of blood, the flow of power is something embodied and physical. Just as the woman feels the flow of blood dry up, so Jesus feels physically the flow of power leave his body. Both the deceased woman with the flow of blood and the divine protagonist of Mark are porous, leaky creatures. In other words, Jesus is establishing to the Greco-Roman audience, you think the male body is this hard, rigid, strong object, and you put the women down as this insignificant, undercooked male? Guess what? The incarnate Logos is saying the male body is nothing, because he can show how weak and porous the male body actually is, and how strong actually a woman's body can actually be, even though you perceive her as porous and weak. So the more theological palatable concepts of Jesus emanating and radiating power render the porosity positively. So it looks like the mark in Jesus appears weak and sickly, but notice what she says. By using terminology of bodily weakness inappropriately to refer to divine power, I intend to underscore the contrast between assessments of human and divine porosity. So using either of the Greco-Roman models of disease reviewed earlier, the mark in Jesus appears weak and sickly. I'm going to skip down. Let's see here. Okay, I'll conclude it on this page here. So on the next page, I'll just keep all that in mind. I'm coming now specifically to a statement that Muslims will point out, and that is Jesus didn't know who touched him. They're completely, if you read the Greek, it doesn't say that. So in 32 to 34, verses 30 to 34, when Jesus, quote, kept looking around to see the woman who had done this, when we read the English of that, we think, oh, he kept looking around like, oh, who was that? Who was that? Right. The Greek actually says that he had a penetrating gaze toward her, not that he lost sight of her. In other words, she touches him, gets healed. She's freaking out. She quickly scurries away into the crowd. Jesus turns around, knows who touched her, touched him, and as she's weaving in and out of the crowd, his eyes are still fixed on her, so hence kept looking around to see that woman. So he knew exactly who touched him. That's the point of the Greek. And because he keeps his eye on her, he's then like, look, he challenges her to come forward and identify herself. Why? Because he wants to give her the opportunity to speak in public by breaking through her isolation and to bear witness on what has just happened to her. Because imagine if she gets healed, right? And then she goes off and lives a life. She's still under a lot of stigma. She can't prove that she's now clean, ceremonially clean, by the way, as well, from a Jewish context. So the fact that Jesus is doing that, going out of his way to publicly declare that she is ceremonially clean, is again elevating women. And again, it's because he's God, part of that whole thing. So I want to now conclude with the last quote from Candida Moss, where and by the way, he calls her daughter. Notice he's like, look, it is in receiving the fullness of healing that the woman is called daughter, reinforcing her reintegration back into the community. So now Candida Moss, this is how she concludes it. Even if Mark's presentation of the body of Jesus is troublesome, it is not necessary to suppose that Mark himself views the porosity of Jesus' body and the leaking of divine power negatively. So we shouldn't be seeing this in the negative sense, because the Greco-Roman reader would not have done that. They would have just been blown away. They're just like, whoa, what did we just read? Because not even our own gods can do this sort of thing. So porosity was viewed positively in the context of ideas about divine beings concealing themselves in human form. The Epiphany motif, the idea that gods travel the earth in disguise as human beings before revealing themselves in displays of greatness, was a well-established convention of Greek mythology. The human shells that the deities inhabited in disguise could barely conceal their divine brilliance and glory. We sort of see a hint of that with the Transfiguration. Notice the maleness of Jesus' body, boom, God's glory is just shining through Jesus in the Transfiguration. Why? Because he's God incarnate. Descriptions of divine beings traveling in disguise frequently refer to their shining faces and the way that their bodies emanated light. The principle of divine light flooding through the confines of the fragile form provides another example of the inability to regulate the boundaries of the body viewed positively as a sign of power. And she brings up actually that Transfiguration thing I just mentioned a moment ago. So following her healing, the woman approaches Jesus with fear and trembling. This response is the standard biblical response to a theophany. Notice that subtle hint, just like the storm theophany in the garden in Genesis 3. You know, when Yahweh is walking in the garden and Adam and Eve are like, well, in the Greek, actually, I'm sorry, in the Hebrew, that's a storm theophany, just like Ezekiel 1. Ezekiel's like, oh my gosh, this is, you know, Yahweh with the throne, or Isaiah 6, I'm a man with unclean lips. It's that same little hint. It is also in Greek mythology the appropriate response to the epiphany of a god or goddess. So it may well be, therefore, that some readers interpreted Jesus' porosity as another clue to his concealed identity. And this is how she ends up. Many interpreters have read the contrast between the two bodies as an example of divine power washing over infirmity, but it's clearly the woman who is the active agent in the healing. That's an interesting point. A porous, weak woman, human woman, has like a type of sovereignty through faith, as Peter, the church father, noted, where she can then be in the same position as, say, a male would when they touched him, right? While the woman becomes dried, hardened, and more masculine, because, you know, that bleeding stopped, the Markan protagonist, qua physician, remains porous, leaky, and effeminate. That the body of Jesus is positioned at the center of a Markan sandwich. There's that, because again, she's a scholar, well familiar with Markan sandwiching, about women only underscores his porous femininity. So both Jesus and the woman appear porous, unregulated, and weak. But here's the point. Porosity, however, is not de facto a negative. The leakiness of the body of Jesus and the fear and trembling of the woman may have suggested to those familiar with such myths, and here's the point, that Jesus is divine. The healing of the woman with the flow of blood serves two purposes. First, it inverts the traditional medical power dynamic in which a physician imparts healing to a patient. Having abandoned the more mainstream medical practices that had made her worse, the woman pulls power out of Jesus himself. And this is the beautiful theology we can get out of this, which is what Canida now says. So after all the medical research that she looked for, the body of Jesus serves as an alternative healthcare system, free and accessible, compared to the expensive and ineffective physicians the woman has already visited. Second, the story implicitly undercuts the association between porosity and weakness so prevalent in the ancient world. And here's the point. The porosity of Jesus serves a positive function. It facilitates the woman's cure and stands as a marker of a hidden divine identity. And so in the end, he's now in other words, he's a divine physician. So in Mark, Jesus acts as a divine physician, and his own body continues to remain porous and uncontrolled, contaminating others with divine power. So there you go. That's that bleeding woman thing, touching his robe and all that. If it's weird, it's important. A Greco-Roman person reading that story, if they were alive today talking to us right now, they'd be like, look, based on our knowledge of Greco-Roman medicine, what's being presented here is Jesus is not a man, like, or just a human. He's more than that. And we, in our ignorance, and when I say I'm speaking about those who ridicule this passage or something, it's just complete arrogance and ignorance. They have no clue about this historical context as to why then Mark, and hence why that even happened. Because guess what? There's a local Gentile context in Mark 5, because guess what? Jesus is in Gerasa, right? Like, this is where he's just healed a demoniac, and so there's that Gentile context going on, and so Jesus is hitting what was already established in their minds in the 20s AD. Mark writing more in the 50s or 60s AD. This idea is still roaming around. There's no other way around it, and yeah, that's all I have to say on that.
I'm thinking that perhaps is a good idea that we don't tell the presidential candidate Joe Biden about this free health care that Jesus would provide to them if it's free and accessible, because he'd probably try to put it into some type of law, sell it to the masses. What that's the historicity of all this and the understanding of the Greco-Roman world in its application here. I was not aware of any of that, and that is just absolutely fabulous, and we appreciate you telling this. The only thing that I was kind of focused on is, okay, well, Jesus, if he is God incarnate and somebody touches him and the power is taken out of him, whereas all the previous prophets, the previous prophets had to derive whatever powers that they used to perform a miracle had to come from God, whereas this miracle comes straight from him, and that power he gives freely to all believers. There we go, the free and accessible Obamacare, or we should just call it Jesus Care is what we should call it. Putting Obama on there.
Yeah.
I did want you to talk about something else, if you don't mind, Robert. I wanted you to go to chapter 8 of Mark, and I know this is out further than chapter 5.
I'm fine with that. Yep.
And I wanted you to touch on, if you could, the denial of Christ, or no, not the denial of Christ, the acknowledgement of Christ as the Messiah, the Son of God, by Peter, but then Jesus turns around just 2 verses later and rebukes Peter for saying that he will not allow Christ to go do something that is denied in the Quran, which is die on a cross. And he tells him, "Get behind me, Satan, because your eyes are not fixed upon these things of God, but of this world." So if he's telling Peter this, that he has to die, how is, if you could just kind of relate that to an apologetic or a polemic against Islamic theology based on that.
So this is these verses here in Mark 8 that I'm screen sharing right now.
People say I am. Yeah, but down further when he rebukes Peter, down.
These over here.
Yes. Verse.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Right there.
Yep. I'll do that right now. So I've just given Adam, and I think Dominic as well, access to the Google Drive while we're talking. So, okay. First things first. What region are they located in? Now, I just for the sake of time, I won't go back into my study notes, because I bring out way back in chapter 1 this thing where Jesus is like, look, be sure that you don't tell anyone. Like, this is at the end of chapter 1. He sternly warned him, encouraged him to go at once, saying, don't tell anyone. And then he does the same thing even to the demons, where he healed many who were sick with various diseases, drove out many demons. However, he wouldn't allow the demons to speak because they knew who he was. Okay, so in other words, scholars call this the Messianic secret. There's something going on as far as they sort of like suddenly realize who he is, but Jesus at the same time wants to remain anonymous, even to the demons, and so on, right? The crux then comes down to in 1 Corinthians 2, where Paul he basically had an epiphany about this. He's like, look, we speak about God's wisdom in a hidden secret. There's that secret language, which God destined before the world began for our glory. And here's why. Because none of the rulers of this world, and rulers of the world in the Greek is the spiritual entities, Satan, power of the earth, all that stuff. None of the rulers of this world understood it. Because if they had, so understood what? Understood the mission of Jesus, right? Because if they had, they would not have crucified Jesus, the Lord of glory. So this is why, like, all throughout the New Testament, like in 1 Peter 1, you had this, even the prophets who prophesied about the grace that was to us carefully research and investigate the salvation. They tried to find what era, specific time, but notice this language, the Spirit of the Messiah. So there's a little bit of a hint, the Holy Spirit, Jesus, like in the Old Testament, in them kept referring to when he predicted the sufferings of the Messiah. And notice how he just throws it in there. He's like, look, these are things that even the angels desire to look into. So even the good angels. Now, all the way back in Job 15, you have God saying, what is mankind that he can be blameless? So does being born of a woman mean he'll be in the right? Look, if God doesn't trust his holy ones, so God doesn't trust even the good angels, because the heavens aren't pure as he looks at them, then how much more is man who drinks injustice? So you see this theme even in Isaiah 34 and all these places where God is not going to trust anyone moving forward, and especially coming back to this thing as in the beginning, this is the beginning of the gospel. And the way all this plays out, because God is going to be very careful in how this plays out. He's going to be deliberate, intelligent, strategic in the locations he goes at. I think that and I'm going to get into Mark 8 now, but just to give everyone an analogy, if you've seen Daniel Craig's James Bond Casino Royale that came out in 2006, that's probably one of my favorite Bond movies. But if any of you have seen it, you'll immediately get where I'm going with this, where Daniel, the James Bond character early in the movie, he's a little bit arrogant. He's sort of like loose with how he goes about his mission. And then he loses the game, like halfway in the movie. And then he realizes, you know what? Okay, I'm enough of mucking around. I'm going to be serious. Because Vespa, I don't want to spoil the movie if you haven't seen it, but I'll just say it anyway. It's spoilers. Vespa, his love interest, he falls in love with her a lot. Like, she betrays him. So, but he doesn't know she's betraying him. But even before he knows, even though she's his love interest, he's not trusting anyone. When he plays that game, the card game, he's just going to play it pretending even his allies are his enemies. God has that same attitude. When the Tower of Babel took place, moving forward with Abraham, boom, when the disinheritance happens to the nations, I'm not going to trust anyone. It's just me, and that's it. Now, why do you think when Jesus says the Father and I know what the Father does, and the Father knows what I do? If God doesn't trust anyone, if he's allowing the Son to work in that trust, what does that imply? Jesus can't be a mere creature. He has to be part of the Godhead as part of the planning. Because, like, just to throw it in here, in Acts 1, when you see Jesus saying, well, when the disciples ask him, Lord, is this the time when you restore the kingdom of Israel? And he's like, look, it's not for you to know what the time periods the Father has fixed according to his own authority. So he's just like, don't worry about it. Just do what I told you to do. I'll do my bit. The paraclete, the comforter that'll come, that's the Holy Spirit. All that will happen. Okay. Now this is going back to Mark 8. Remember when I spoke about the unclean spirits, that connection to Genesis 6, the Rephaim, all that stuff, right? In Second Temple literature, what was considered as the ground zero for the emergence of the proliferation of demons and evil is actually this location, Caesarea Philippi. So Jesus and his disciples set out for the villages around Caesarea. This is Mount Hermon, where the transfiguration takes place. That's the location. He says this is the gates of hell. And in the Matthew account, in Matthew 16, a lot of translations will say, go for it.
Yeah. When you talk about Caesarea Philippi, this is where they had those Roman temples where they were sacrificing children to the god. And so, yeah, this is right at the base of Mount.
And there's Panius and Pan, all those Greco-Roman gods. Yeah.
Right.
Now, a lot of translations will say the powers of hell or the gates of hell will not conquer this church, because upon this rock I'll build my congregation, the church, and so on. The rock is not Peter or Jesus. The rock is this geographical location Jesus is using as the gates of hell. Upon this rock, this declaration you've just made, Peter, you are the Messiah, the Son of God. So it's upon this rock I'm going to build my congregation, ecclesia, the kingdom of God, right, is now being inaugurated. The nations are going to crumble. Where it started, which is this location, the gates of hell, now translations to say conquer. In the Greek, it's literally withstand. So the gates of hell will not withstand it. So who's doing the attacking? Do gates attack the church? No, gates are defensive structures. So upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not withstand the onslaught of the church. And hence why Paul says in like Romans, I think it's at the end in Romans 16, where he's like Satan is being crushed under the feet of the church. Yeah, over here it is. The God of peace will soon crush Satan under your feet. Well, why? Because again, like in Ephesians, we are seated with Christ in the heavenlies, and even though he's far above every rule, authority, power, dominion, and every name that can be named, God has put everything under the Messiah's feet and has made him the head of everything for the good of the church, which is his body. And so if we are in Jesus, then everything is underneath Jesus, right? But we are with Jesus. So in other words, we're not under Jesus' feet. We're with Jesus in that council realm, in the resurrection and so on. And hence, the dark forces are under the feet of Jesus. And hence, we, the church, so Satan is under our feet in turn. So coming back to Mark 8, now that we see this dark context of Caesarea Philippi, then he asks the question, who do people say I am? Now notice, this is again an insight as to what we were just discussing a moment ago, this very rich heritage of where the Jews at the time were like this person, that person, but specifically now already since John the Baptist is established, so some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, still others one of the prophets. But who do you say I am? And Peter says, you are the Messiah. And now notice this again, Messianic secret happening just again. Sternly ordered them not to tell anyone, right? But then when he says this next bit, this is an insight as to where Jesus is or God is cunning in the sense of that secret, even though Peter got it right, yeah, you are the Messiah, right? He still doesn't know why. But that is not a wrong thing. That's actually a good thing, because see, he's testing them. He's like, look, then he began to teach them that the Son of Man is that divine Son of Man of Daniel 7 would have to suffer a great deal and be rejected by the elders, high priests, and scribes. Remember the Herodian context I mentioned a moment ago? Then he would be killed, and after 3 days he'd rise again. He was speaking about this matter quite. Now notice this, I just love how Mark, because this is the point, and scholars will point this out. Mark has been building up this messianic secret, all through the chapters. And then Mark, this shows the historicity of this discussion, because suddenly he's being a bit frank about it. He's being quite open, which is, Jesus, weren't you saying just a moment ago you said, sternly ordered them not to tell anyone. And then suddenly Jesus goes into this, well, let me tell you about the future. Remember Doc Brown and Back to the Future is like, Marty, you could cause serious displacement in the space-time fabric if you tell people about the future. So Peter then took him aside and was like, look, began to rebuke him. This is ridiculous, because as far as I know in Daniel 7, the Son of Man doesn't die. The Son of Man receives the kingdom, right? But turning and looking at his disciples, Jesus rebuked Peter, saying, get behind me. And now Satan here is not the devil. You could sort of connect this to the Caesarea Philippi sort of region, the demonic sort of context of this region. Satan as a word just means opposer. In fact, for example, in the Old Testament, you have Yahweh called Satan. For example, when the angel of the Lord opposes Balaam's donkey, he's ha-sataning Balaam's donkey. Or when Yahweh is opposing, say, David in Chronicles, like in 1 Chronicles 21, like you see Satan, like the Samuel account will say Yahweh, the Chronicles will say Satan. Yeah, yes, it's one and the same person. In other words, Satan just means to oppose, to like push against. So get behind me, you opposer, because you're not thinking God's thoughts, but human thoughts. And that's, again, an insight. God's thoughts, so my ways, not your ways. And this is connecting to, they still don't know the plan, which is good. So then Jesus called the crowd to himself along with the disciples. If anyone wants to follow me, he must deny himself, all that stuff, right? Notice he goes back to Son of Man language. Son of Man will be ashamed of him when he comes with it. Now notice this, with the holy angels in his Father's glory. Later on in Mark 13, Jesus says the Son of Man will send out his angels to gather the elect. The Son of Man's coming on clouds, the cloud rider. So now this is then connected to not just the transfiguration, but also the resurrection. I tell all of you with certainty, some people standing here will not experience death until they see the kingdom of God arrive with power. Boom, that's resurrection, right? Then like 6 days later, they go up that high mountain in that same region, Mount Hermon, and then transfiguration takes place. So this is my response to those people who are confused about this passage. Again, huge high Christology right throughout. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I didn't understand that last thing you said. That's probably why there's an awkward pause there. Sorry about that. But again, this is where.
Did I need to clarify anything, by the way?
No,
or was I?
It was,
okay.
It's perfectly clear. But when we start talking about the denial of the crucifixion itself, I mean, this is the centrality of the Christian faith, and to try to say that you are a prophet in the line of Jesus, and you deny the one central thing of the faith itself, the Christianity itself, I don't see how you could be, demonstrate any clearer that you're a false prophet. And that's just my opinion. But when you deny the central event in Christianity never happened, that just demonstrates to me that you have no idea what the Christian faith is all about. And we also find that littered, in 4:157, 5:116, where he tries to associate. I said 4:171. I'm sorry, where he tries to associate.
Oh yeah, in the Quranic context, yeah.
That's just trying to make Mary part of the Trinity.
Well, just to okay, that's right. I forgot. I was trying to remember because you wanted to connect it to the Quran. There is a paper I have by a Muslim that he can't help, but he debated Shabir Ally on this. In fact, Tony Costa, this particular, I think his name was Khalid something, and then Shabir Ally, the three of them were in this panel. And Shabir just couldn't help, he just didn't know how to respond to what Khalid was saying. I think his name is Khalid. In fact, I could be mispronouncing his name, but he goes, when the Quran says, and I'm kind of paraphrasing it, but it appeared to them that he was crucified, but he was not, for Allah took him. So he's like, well, that actually doesn't contradict the Christian scriptures, because we know for a fact in history, it's a bedrock fact, Jesus was crucified. In fact, and this was his point in that discussion, which is a brilliant insight, and it's such a simple insight. If you remove all bias and you just read chronologically through Mark, so Mark 1, 2, 3, you start to see this build up, God and flesh, and a man at the same time, but God and flesh. If Mark 16 did not happen, the resurrection, it would be a massive backfire. You've just built up this entire case for this person, Jesus, and then it just, he doesn't resurrect. So So then he goes, when the Quran says it appeared that he died, but he was not, for Allah took him, what if that's a hint to, because Christians believe this, that we don't believe, so I'll ask you, Eric, do you believe that the Logos died? That the divine nature died? And you'd say no. It's the human body that died. That's it. So it appeared that he died, but he did not, for Allah took him. And that's exactly what Jesus says, Father, into your hands I give my spirit. And so the divine nature of Jesus, that divine nature, the spiritual nature, that was not crucified or killed. It was the human body that died. And hence the Quranic perception of it appeared that he died. It's not denying that he died. It appeared that he died, but he did actually not die, for Allah took him. So in that sense, that reading is actually defending the crucifixion of Jesus and the ascension of Jesus' spirit. Well, in this case, the Logos entity. And so I have the paper on that if anyone's interested. It's in my Google. It's in fact, I'll bring it up just for everyone to see. Yeah.
Well, we had we did an entire show one afternoon on a professor from Zaytuna University out in California, it's an Islamic university, and this guy's whole his whole thesis was that 157 does not teach that Jesus was saved from the cross. It does not teach that Jesus did not die on the cross. And that was his whole supposition. It gives a very intelligent, and very compelling, I might add, presentation, saying that Islam does not teach that. His problem is, this is just me thinking, is that 5.99999 billion other Muslims think that he's wrong, or the majority of them think he's wrong. So when Jesus starts, and I'll circle back the wagons here. So when Jesus starts rebuking Peter for saying, no, I'm going to prevent you from going to Jerusalem to be crucified.
Yeah.
What he's doing is essentially doing the same thing that Muhammad did. And Jesus tells him, hey, get behind me, Satan. My thoughts are on, heavenly things. Yours are on earthly things. And this is the same thing that Muhammad did. How can Jesus be crucified? I mean, he is, a servant of God. He's the prophet of God. So he could not mix those two things. Who's this by?
Okay, here's the paper. I've just found it. So it's Khalil and Dani. So this is the paper here. And by the way, he's a legit scholar. He's written for, I think he's doing a Harvard dissertation. They killed him not, the crucifixion in Shia Ismaili Islam. So they killed him not, nor crucified him, but so it was made to appear to them. And then another verse, think not of those who are slain in God's way as dead. Nay, they live, finding their sustenance in the presence of the Lord. So I won't go through all this, but I'll just show you a bullet point summary he makes.
If I may state a little over here, the Shia sect is already a very smaller sect of Islam, and Shia Ismailis are once again subsect of Shia Islam. So this guy is in minority of the minority. So that's the problem.
Sure. Yeah. But to be honest, Patricia Crone, for example, like in her work, she says that if you take the first 500 years of church history, 1st century to 5th or 6th century, mash all Jewish literature, Christian literature, Gnostic literature, patristic writings, just mash it in a big blender, right? Blend it up, then do a big like extraction, like redaction, right? Like drenching out all the unnecessary liquids, right? You get the Quran. And so I agree with that. It's this mashed up mishmash of Gnostic, Christian, Jew, patristic, like it just shows that. And I can't help but go, well, why is this person, even though he's a minority, he's still able to read that verse and be pro-Christian about it? So look at this deductive argument he makes. He's like, look, the Ismaili position on the crucifixion. Now imagine you and I were not Christian. we're just shown this bullet point list, and then one day we go to church and a Christian is preaching about the crucifixion. The challenge is there a difference? And in my opinion, I don't see a difference. So he says, historically, Jesus was crucified and killed. There was no substitute. Boom. Yep. All scholars agree with that. Even secular scholars agree with that. This historical Jesus research. That which, quote unquote, appeared to them, and I think Adam would know the Arabic here.
Subhanallah, yes.
Is that the Arabic?
Yeah, Subhan bil
Subiha
Suhabi.
Allahum or something.
What is that? Anyhow.
Okay. Well, that which appeared to them as being crucified was precisely the body, human nature of Jesus. I don't know if he's trying to translate in a very clean way the Arabic into English, but
Shubha lahum. Yeah, so that's the Arabic of the Quran 4:157. Shubha lahum means it appeared to them as if. So shubha means doubtful. So basically, if I need to say I am a doubt in Arabic, I will say I have a shubha. So shubha lahum is it appeared to them as they doubted that it was Jesus. So because he is actually referring to Quran verses 4:157, which actually clearly says that it starts from saying that, and Jews says basically, indeed we have killed the Messiah, Jesus, son of Mary, the messenger of Allah, and they killed him not. So we say wama qatalu wama sulubu. They killed him not did we crucify him. Walakin shubha lahum, but it appeared to them as if.
Yeah. So that which appeared to them as being crucified was precisely the body of human nature. I think it's the nasut of Jesus. So being crucified was what was being crucified was the human nature, right? But Christ's soul, as manifestation of his divine nature, the lahut, could not be killed. And this is what the Quran speaks of when it says they killed him not, nor did they crucify him, the soul part. The Bible and the Quran are thus in agreement over the crucifixion.
The problem with that is the post crucifixion sighting, the resurrection sightings. That's the whole problem with this supposition here. It's the denial of the true gospel, what's taught by Christians and has been taught by Christians for 2,000 years, and he gets up in there and he denies it. And I think then this is why I wanted you to tie that verse there in chapter 8 where Jesus is telling Peter, this is the thing of, this is essentially a thing of Satan, is to deny my death, try to prevent it and make it just appear that I died. Well, what's the purpose of that? I mean, that has nothing to do with Old Testament, blood atonement or anything of that nature. Okay, as you can hear, that's our 90-second warning.
I just want to point it out that Peter, in his context, is not thinking the way Muslims are thinking. He's thinking of Daniel 7, the Son of Man, who does not die. This is new stuff because it's connected to the secret motif that God has in plan. Because Paul says, if Satan knew the plan, he would not have killed Jesus. That meaning the fact that Peter's reacting, God is like, yes, it's still working. Even Peter's there. It's like, when Jesus says you're close to the kingdom, but not really. Peter's on the right track, but he still doesn't know, like, what do you mean Jesus, Son of Man's going to die? Okay, just wait and watch. And sure enough, that happens. And then finally they get it. The Son of Man has to die in order to receive the kingdom. And then the saints is part of that whole thing.
Right. And my whole opinion is that it didn't appear to anybody. I mean, this is as good as historical fact as you possibly can get if you do history. And that's kind of my cognate area on my undergrad studies. So, all right, guys, we're going to go ahead and Stephanie, please let Stephanie, she's got her hand up. My goodness. Okay. It looks like we're going to, okay, Stephanie, I'm going to bring you up on mic. I just unmuted you, Missy. Stephanie is a Muslim, Rob, if you didn't realize that. She's a very popular girl on Facebook, I might add. And she's got a bit of an accent, but we can understand her. So go ahead, Steph.
Oh, Vlad's in the room. Hey, Vlad. It's my good friend Vlad.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I would like to give a comment about what Brother Robert said. It's about crucifixion, about Jesus, peace be upon him. The verse in the Quran says, "Shubbiha lahum," okay, appeared to them, not "Shubbiha alayhim." There's big difference, okay. And the matter is the crucifixion, that from the beginning of the verse, the Jews said, "We killed him," right? They killed him not and crucified him not. So the matter is the crucifixion. Allah said, "Killed him not, crucified him not." So it doesn't mean he was on the cross.
Okay, what we're going to do, Stephanie, here's what we're going to do. Hey, Vlad, glad to see you made it today. Even though you're like an hour and 59 minutes late, it's okay. What we're going to do is...
Well, you recorded it, so Vlad's going to love the recording.
Yeah, okay.
It's good to see you, buddy. It's good to see you.
What we're going to do is we're going to make this the topic of next week. We're going to make the crucifixion the topic of next week. And Steph, if you want to prepare some stuff, and I'll let you come up on mic next week.
I'm also happy to quickly engage Steph right now if you have time.
Okay, go ahead, Rob. Go ahead. But we're going to make
No. Like, how much time do you have left? Because
I can give you 5 minutes, but we can't go much longer than that because the recording gets too long and I can't upload it to Blog Talk.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
So Steph, all I say, Steph, is this. I'm talking to you here as purely because I was an atheist. I've been a Christian now for about 8 years. So naturally, all that you're seeing here, I don't know if you've seen most of my presentation, but this is just, I think you can see it's high academic sort of engagement, right? Academic, but with a Christian conclusion. But putting all that aside, all the theological stuff aside, it is a fact in history. When you look at Jesus studies, historical Jesus studies, Jesus, the person, was killed on a Roman cross in history. And so then I can't help but go, if I read, and I think this one, I think you'll know, I want you to reflect on this. I think it's Surah 61, where Jesus says, "The one that will come after me, I've been sent," like I'm speaking on behalf of Allah, and I'm speaking about the Injil and the law, I'm confirming those things. And then someone is going to come after me named Ahmed. And then you trail that language out with this paraclete of John 14. And in other words, I know in your belief system, you believe that Allah is working with this in divine providence and inspiration, that Allah is putting in the lips of Jesus, that Jesus is accurately quoting John 14, that the paraclete, the comforter, is Muhammad, right? And so that's why Muslims go to John 14 to say Muhammad's prophesied. But I can't help but go, in hindsight of history, when you look at the first 600 years, there were other people before Muhammad claiming to be the paraclete, right? Claiming to be that comforter, like Montanus, for example. Eusebius picks up on this. So what I'm saying is, when you look at the crucifixion, when you look at the way Jesus does things in the Quran, like he makes clay birds fly, which is a Gnostic story, it goes back to that observation I made a moment ago, that the Quran is nothing but amalgamation, a mishmash of all these legends outside Orthodox Christianity in a very confused state. So when you see verses like, in chapter 4 about it appeared to them, he didn't die, it looked like he died. Notice that you already have factions in your own group, like this Khalil Andani person, where he's going, look, if I put this particular lens on and I read it that way, I clearly see a differentiation of the divine element of Jesus that was not killed because Allah took him, but the human side did die, and that's apparently what the grammar's communicating to me, that Khalil person. But then you, of a more orthodox strand, will be like, no, I don't believe that because I'm reading it this way. But notice this confusion. That's what I'm getting at. That just communicates to me how clear then that the Quran is nothing but an amalgamation of a very confused piecing up together and stitching together of all these ideas. If you go to the first century context, remove Quran, remove Islam, remove all stuff that happens post 2nd century AD, just stick with 1st century and Second Temple Jewish theology and scholarship, everything works out beautifully. Jesus dies, Jesus rises, you know.
Okay.
That's the Orthodox faith. Yeah.
Okay. There's something I want to prepare, of course, because I'm a debater or as studied as scholars. But the issue is the canon, okay, of the Gospels. Let's say when the Gospels written first, I'm not saying it's as argument, but we want to know the canon of the Gospels when the Gospels were written. That's first. And was there a Gospel written before Paul wrote? No. Paul, who wrote the first one about Christianity, right? There was no Gospel before Paul. So if we want to, from the beginning, okay, to the canon and the earliest fathers, what did the earliest fathers talk about the Gospels? And even in Didah, I don't know if I say it right, what was said, one Gospel, not Gospels, right?
Okay, just for the sake of time, this is very important, Eric. I just need to quickly say this. Okay. For the sake of time, this is for you. I have a Bedrock series on my channel right now where I actually touch on this. Paul's biography is beautiful. Christianity is not Pauline. Paul, a zealous Jew, the reason why he's persecuting the church is because he thinks Jesus is a heretic. He thinks this whole movement is heresy because he's taking the zealousness of prior Jews in the Old Testament and, like, say, Judas Maccabeus, and saying, look, he's cursed on a tree. This screams heresy, that this movement. That's why he's being zealous the way he is. 1 Corinthians 15 creed that he receives is within months of the crucifixion. So crucifixion is 33 AD. Paul meets Peter and James in around 37 AD. That 4-year gap is when in Galatians, one of the earliest Pauline letters, is when he's like, look, I had to, because I was so blown away with this epiphany and this realization of this whole time I was persecuting the church, but then I realized, oh my gosh, Yahweh can actually, like, that's his Messiah. So he goes away, does his thing in Damascus, and then comes back and then authenticates the creedal traditions that the church is already establishing. So when you say, look, there's no gospel, well, actually, this is not to be derogative to you. If you said that to Jesus scholarship, historical Jesus scholarship, a lot of the scholars would be yawning at that. Yawning in the sense of not disagreeing with you. They'll be like, we know. And that's fine. The fact that Paul has a psychological change and then tells the Corinthians, and in his letters, he's using the creedal traditions of Jesus died according to the scriptures, was buried, was raised again according to the scriptures. That's not original to Paul. Paul then utilizes that to then make the theology he makes in his letters. And that same creedal theology then isolated from Paul. So put Paul aside. Then we see Mark do his thing, right, under Peter. If Mark is the first gospel, you would have a strong case if you can demonstrate contradictions. And here's, I guess, a challenge for you. If you can demonstrate contradictions between Paul's letters, especially his undisputed letters. So apparently there's 7 undisputed letters, but you can even redact that down to just 4 undisputed letters. So like Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, and Galatians. Okay. If you can show a contradiction between Mark and those 4 letters, you can have the cake and eat it too. But if there's no contradiction theologically, and if everything works out, even just the opening 4 verses of Romans, everything is working out perfectly in its own isolated form. So just go on Google, YouTube, just type in Bedrock of Christianity. Central Apologetics. That's my channel. So,
what we're going to be doing is we're going to be picking this discussion up next week, Steph. I appreciate
crucifixion, or exactly crucifixion, or about Paul, because I have to prepare. Because even Paul epistles, I want to discuss about Paul epistles, who wrote Paul epistles, and
you can have both. I'm fine. I don't want to take up Derek's time. So
no. I got to cut this out, Stephanie, because I'm going to go way too long, and I'm not going to be able to upload this.
Okay.
All right, Missy, be back here next Sunday. As a matter of fact, I'm gonna IM you when we get off of here on Facebook, and we'll get this straightened out for next week. Again, Rob, thank you so much for coming and spending the middle of your night with us and enjoying a good bottle.
Well, I finished my scotch. So,
yeah, I see that. I was wondering if you got that thing down. Everybody else that's come, again, I thank you so much for coming. Don't forget this Tuesday, Radio Free Kafir Stand. We're going to have Chris Claus coming up, and we're going to be talking about Deuteronomy 18:18 in the article that I got to be the editor for that article. It's all the content's Chris's, but I got to edit that, and we put it up on the crossingthecrescent.com. So I hope that you go up there and read that, and we'll be discussing that. And Adam, you need to show up Tuesday also, because I wanted to discuss that that article that you have on your website that lists the Islamic countries and their laws as far as apostasy is concerned. Again, God bless everybody, and we will see you next Sunday on the Crossing the Crescent discussion group. Again, thank you
also
everybody for coming.
Eric, yes. Private message me your YouTube channel, like where you put these discussions, so I can.
Yeah, I'll send it to you. You got it.
Yep, sweet.
You got it. We got it all there. All right. We'll see y'all next Sunday.
God bless.
Bye.